The world is not running out of oil. It is running out of control. What you are watching unfold is not a trade dispute, not diplomacy, not even ideology. It is a quiet war over who decides where power flows. Iran, Venezuela, their oil has not disappeared. It has simply been rerouted, sold quietly, bought primarily by China. Now that oil is coming under US control, and that changes everything, because this was never about pumping more barrels, it was about who holds the valve. The same logic applies to Greenland, to the Arctic, to missile paths over frozen oceans, to alliances being reforged with Japan, and to deals pulling Taiwan's chip-making back onto American soil. If you think these are separate stories, you are missing the pattern. Stay with me, because once you see the system, you won't unsee it. If this perspective sharpens how you read the news, follow closely. We're just getting started. Now let me show you what this fight is really about. What we are really talking about here is leverage, not headlines, not personalities, not even elections. At the center of this story is a single question: who controls the choke points of the global system? Energy, trade routes, technology, geography. For years, China has understood something many in the West preferred to ignore. Power in the 21st century is not built by confrontation alone. It is built by positioning. Buying sanctioned oil from Iran and Venezuela was never just about fuel. It was about insulating China from pressure, undermining US sanctions, and slowly shifting the balance. At the same time, the Arctic was treated as distant, remote, someone else's problem. But geography does not care about political comfort. Missiles travel over the Arctic, submarines hide under its ice, and whoever dominates that space shapes the security of North America itself. This is why alliances matter again, why Japan matters, why Canada's drift matters, why Taiwan matters. These are not isolated moves. They are pieces of one board, and once you see the board, the next step becomes unavoidable. Let's rewind and see how we got here. To understand this moment, you have to step back, not months, years. After the Cold War, the Arctic faded from urgency. The United States reduced its presence. Canada underinvested. Greenland became an afterthought, managed quietly through Denmark. The assumption was simple: the ice would protect us, and no one would challenge the status quo. That assumption was wrong. As climate change opened new routes, the Arctic stopped being frozen space and became strategic space. Russia moved first, rebuilding bases, using Arctic waters for submarines and fleets. China followed differently, not with flags, with research vessels. Then, in 2024, something changed. A Chinese research submarine moved under the Arctic ice. That was not science, that was rehearsal. At the same time, energy markets were being reshaped. Sanctions pushed Iranian and Venezuelan oil into gray channels. China absorbed it, quietly, reliably. Control shifted without a single shot fired. Meanwhile, supply chains hollowed out the West, microchips were outsourced, energy leverage weakened, security assumptions aged badly. This wasn't negligence, it was a cycle. Prosperity bred complacency, complacency created exposure, and exposure invites pressure. That pressure is about to surface. Then the system began to crack, not all at once, but visibly. The first rupture came through oil. For years, sanctioned crude from Venezuela and Iran flowed east, quietly, primarily to China. It wasn't legal, but it was effective. That oil kept Chinese industry insulated, protected from pressure, shielded from Western leverage. Then the flow shifted. U.S. assets moved into position. Ships concentrated near Venezuela. Control points tightened. Suddenly the issue was no longer production. It was who decides where the oil goes. And Beijing noticed. Because when illicit supply comes under American control, something breaks. Pricing power weakens, strategic autonomy shrinks, and dependencies are exposed. This wasn't just about energy, it was about signaling. At the same time, attention turned north, to Greenland, to radar systems, to missile paths across the Arctic. Energy control in the south, security control in the north. If you're starting to sense a pattern, you should. This is how leverage is rebuilt, quietly, systematically. If this analysis helps you see beyond the headlines, stay with me, because the deeper mechanisms are next, and once you understand them, the stakes become unmistakable. What holds this system together is something rarely discussed: control without ownership. You don't need to annex territory to dominate it. You don't need to drill every barrel to control oil. You don't need to fire a missile to shape deterrence. You need position, take energy. Sanctions alone don't stop flows, but control over shipping lanes, insurance, enforcement, and choke points does. When oil moves under American surveillance, even indirectly, leverage returns. The same logic applies to the Arctic. Radar coverage, early warning systems, submarine detection. You don't own the ice, you shape what can move through it. This is why Greenland matters. Not as land, as infrastructure. Missiles crossing the pole cannot be stopped from Florida or Texas. They are tracked from the north, from Canada, from Greenland, and this is why alliances suddenly matter again. Japan, Taiwan, even Canada, because systems do not collapse from enemies alone. They collapse when partners drift. China understands this deeply. It builds dependencies, research missions that double as mapping, trade deals that become leverage. What you're witnessing is not escalation, it's realignment. And when alignment shifts, crisis is never far behind, because the system resists change. That resistance is about to surface again. The second rupture doesn't come from oil, it comes from the north. While attention stayed fixed on trade wars and tariffs, something else accelerated. China and Russia began operating together in the Arctic. Joint drills, shared bases, Chinese bombers taking off from Russian Arctic airfields. This was not symbolism, it was coordination. In 2024, a Chinese research submarine moved beneath the Arctic ice. That matters because research submarines are never just research. They map, they test, they prepare. Under that ice runs the shortest path for missiles, the blind spot of North American defense. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The United States has no naval base in Alaska. Canada has a vast Arctic border with minimal defense. Greenland's presence was reduced for decades. This is not a Chinese advantage created overnight. It is a vacuum left open. So when Canada begins edging closer to Beijing, signing new trade arrangements, lowering tariffs, calling the relationship more predictable, alarm bells ring in Washington. Because this is not about commerce, it is about trust under pressure. An undefended border plus a drifting partner equals vulnerability. Systems break where they are neglected. And now the Arctic is no longer quiet, it is contested. And that contest is pulling everyone else in. This is where it stops being abstract. This is where it reaches you. Because when systems shift, they don't announce themselves politely. They show up in prices, in jobs, in uncertainty. If you live in North America, your security has long been invisible. Borders felt permanent. Supply chains felt reliable. Peace felt like the default. But that feeling was a luxury created by control you never had to think about. When energy leverage weakens, you feel it at the pump. When supply chains break, you feel it in inflation. When deterrence erodes, you feel it as anxiety before you can name the cause. And when allies drift, the cost is not diplomatic, it is personal. Because a missile threat over the Arctic doesn't care about politics. Because chip shortages don't respect ideology. Because instability taxes everyone quietly. You didn't choose this system, but you live inside it. And awareness is no longer optional. If this perspective helps you connect the dots others ignore, stay with me. Share this, Follow closely, because understanding the system is the first form of defense. Now lift your eyes outward, because what's happening doesn't stop at borders. Zoom out, because this is no longer a North American story, it's global. When the United States tightens control over oil flows, markets react everywhere. China feels pressure not just in energy, but in strategic planning. Europe watches closely, aware that sanctions only work when enforcement does. In Asia, alliances harden. The United States deepens ties with Japan, not symbolically, operationally. That matters because the East China Sea and South China Sea are not distant disputes. They are arteries of global trade. And then there is Taiwan. A new trade deal lowers U.S. tariffs. In exchange, $250 billion flows into American technology. More than $165 billion from Taiwan Semiconductor alone. Factories expand in Arizona, chips come home, China condemns it, because this isn't economics, it's deterrence. When supply chains move closer to allies, coercion loses power. When technology spreads across trusted partners, conflict becomes costlier. Even Canada's choices ripple outward. A drift toward Beijing sends signals across the alliance network. The system responds to signals. And right now, the signal is clear. The board is tightening, positions are being locked in, and when that happens, the future stops being theoretical. Let's talk about where this leads next. The future now branches, not infinitely, but clearly. There are three paths ahead. The first is stabilization. Control holds, oil flows are monitored, Arctic cooperation deepens through alliances. Taiwan's integration into U.S. supply chain strengthens deterrence. China recalibrates, not because it agrees, but because pressure works. This is the quiet success scenario. No victory speeches, just fewer crises. The second path is friction. Allies hesitate. Canada drifts without fully breaking. China probes gray zones. More research missions. More economic leverage. No war, but constant tension. The system creaks but doesn't snap. The third path is escalation. Control fails in one domain. Energy, technology, or the Arctic. One miscalculation, one alliance fracture, one moment where deterrence is tested and found thin. That is how systems break, not from ambition alone, but from misread signals. History teaches us this. Empires rarely fall from lack of power. They fall from losing control of the mechanisms that project it. The next decade will not be decided by speeches. It will be decided by who holds the valves, the roots, the platforms, and whether the system holds together. Which brings us to the final question. What do you do with this understanding? This is the moment most people miss, because they are trained to look for drama, not structure. What decides the future is rarely loud. It is procedural, incremental, hidden in shipping lanes, radar arcs, trade clauses, and fabs in the desert. The real insight is this. Power today is not about domination. It is about designing systems others must live inside. Oil under watch, chips produced among allies, missile paths tracked before they exist, partnerships tightened where geography demands trust. This is not inevitability, it is choice. And once you see the system, you see your role differently. Not as a spectator, but as a citizen inside a fragile architecture. What you pay attention to matters, what you dismiss matters, what you share matters. If this analysis helped you see the hidden logic behind today's chaos, don't stop here. Follow this thread, because the next chapter will not announce itself, and the people who understand the system early are never the ones caught off guard later. This is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of clarity.